Waiting for someone to change is one of the most socially accepted ways people lose years. Because it doesn't look like self-abandonment while you're inside it. It looks like loyalty. It looks like patience. It looks like love. It looks like maturity. And if you're anxious attached, it can even feel like your highest virtue, because your nervous system is built to keep connection alive. So you keep investing. You keep understanding. You keep translating their behavior into a story that lets you stay. You tell yourself they're stressed, they're healing, they're scared, they've had a hard life, they're not used to love, they're avoidant, they need time. And sometimes those stories are true. But here is what matters more than the stories: the pattern you are living inside of. Because patterns don't care about intentions. Patterns care about what repeats. This episode is about the psychology of waiting for someone to change, especially in avoidant and anxious dynamics, and why waiting feels like love, while it quietly becomes a contract where your needs are permanently postponed. By the end, you'll be able to tell the difference between patience that is healthy and waiting that is self-betrayal. How avoidant patterns create the perfect waiting room. How anxious attachment gets trained to stay there. What actually makes people change. And the exact structure that gets you out without becoming cold, chaotic, or reactive. Let's start with the most honest sentence in this entire topic. You are not waiting for change. You are waiting for proof. Proof that your love was not misplaced. Proof that your intuition was not wrong. Proof that the energy you poured in will eventually make sense. Waiting protects you from the sharp grief of realizing you gave real effort to someone who could not meet you. If you leave, you have to face finality. If you stay, you get to keep the fantasy that it will become what you imagined. And that fantasy is not shallow. It's a nervous system strategy. It keeps you from feeling the full pain all at once. So waiting is emotionally seductive because it lets you suffer without ending the story. Anxious attachment will often choose suffering with hope over peace with finality. Not because you are weak, but because your nervous system fears rupture more than it fears a slow leak. Now, why is waiting so common with avoidant patterns specifically? Because avoidant dynamics are built to create what the anxious system mistakes as potential. Avoidant patterns often give you warmth in flashes. They give you intimacy in moments. They give you vulnerability once in a while. They give you the kind of connection that feels rare, like you accessed something hidden. And then they pull back. That pullback is the hook. The pullback creates tension, and tension creates focus. Your brain becomes more invested because the reward is unpredictable. You start working for access, and work makes you value the outcome more. The more you pay, the more your mind insists it must be worth it. This is how waiting becomes rational. You interpret the rare good moments as the real them. You label the withdrawal as temporary. You treat the inconsistency as a phase. And you keep telling yourself, if I can just get back to that version, then it will stabilize. But the honest question is not which version is real. The honest question is which version you are living with most of the time. Because that version is the relationship. Now, here's a definition you can actually live by. Waiting becomes self-betrayal when it requires you to continuously lower your standards to keep the bond. That's the line. Healthy patience does not require you to shrink. Healthy patience does not require you to accept chronic inconsistency. Healthy patience does not require you to postpone your needs indefinitely. Healthy patience has a timeline and evidence of movement. Self-betrayal waiting has no timeline and no movement. It has excuses, extensions, and resets. It has promises without behavior. It has closeness without repair. It has the same loop repeating with different wording. If you want to know which one you're in, ask yourself this: if I continue exactly as it is for 6 more months, will I feel more secure or more exhausted? That answer tells you everything. Now, we need to separate two categories that people confuse: people who are in a growth process and people who are using growth language as a shield. A person in a growth process can identify their pattern, take responsibility for it, and adjust behavior over time. They don't just say the right things, their behavior shifts. The silence reduces. The follow-through increases. They repair when there's rupture. Their words begin to match their actions. A person using growth language as a shield will say all the right phrases, but the pattern stays the same. They will tell you they're overwhelmed, they need space, they're trying, they're healing, they're not good at feelings, they're busy, they're not ready. Those statements can be true, but truth is not the test. Change is the test. If the pattern does not change, the statements become a way to keep you in the waiting room while they maintain comfort. Now let's talk about why anxious attachment waits, because this is where people get stuck in self-blame. An anxious system seeks safety through certainty. It wants clarity because clarity reduces the internal alarm. When someone is inconsistent, the anxious system tries to solve the inconsistency by investing more. It thinks, if I love better, if I communicate better, if I stay calm, if I don't pressure, if I understand, if I am patient, then the inconsistency will end and I will finally be safe. That's the anxious bargain. If I perform correctly, I will be chosen. But this bargain quietly removes one of the most important truths in relationships. You cannot perform someone into capacity. You cannot love someone into emotional availability. You cannot be patient enough to turn partial behavior into full commitment. You can influence, you can invite, but you cannot override. So waiting becomes self-betrayal when you keep acting as if your performance is the missing ingredient, when the real missing ingredient is their capacity and their choice. Now, here is the most uncomfortable truth, and it is the one that breaks the spell of waiting. People don't change because you wait. People change when changing becomes more rewarding than staying the same. Patterns are repeated because they work. Avoidant distancing works because it reduces vulnerability, reduces pressure, and gives control. If every time they distance you, chase, they get the benefit of space while keeping access. That pattern is rewarded, so it continues. If every time they do the bare minimum, you respond with full emotional access, the bare minimum is rewarded, so it continues. If every time they come back vaguely, you treat it like a clean return, vagueness is rewarded, so it stays vague. This is why waiting is so dangerous. Waiting often includes rewarding the exact behavior you say you don't want. You call it love. Your nervous system calls it hope. But the pattern calls it reinforcement. And reinforcement is the engine of repetition. Now, there's a subtle move anxious people do that makes waiting feel even more noble. They start parenting the other person emotionally. They overfunction. They explain, translate, soothe, anticipate, repair, and carry the emotional workload. It makes the relationship run. It keeps connection alive. But it teaches the avoidant system something it doesn't even consciously realize it's learning: that it can stay underdeveloped and still receive a full relationship experience. Then, closeness begins to feel like obligation because you are doing so much. So they pull away to feel free again. And you interpret the pull away as a sign you need to be even more understanding. That's the trap. Overfunctioning creates more avoidance. Then avoidance creates more overfunctioning. Waiting becomes a full lifestyle inside the relationship. Now, before this sounds like blame, remember, the goal is not to demonize anyone. Many avoidant people are not trying to hurt you. They are trying to regulate. But regulation that costs you your stability is not a relationship contract you should accept. Compassion does not mean compliance. You can understand their pattern without living inside it. That line is the difference between healthy empathy and self-betrayal. Now, let's talk about the 5 psychological hooks that keep you waiting. Because if you don't see them, you will keep calling them love. Hook 1 is intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictable reward cycle. Your brain becomes more obsessed when warmth is inconsistent. That's why you think about them more when they are distant. Your brain is trying to regain the reward. Hook 2 is sunk cost. The more time, emotion, and identity you've invested, the harder it is to leave, because leaving forces you to admit the investment didn't produce what you wanted. Hook 3 is identity attachment. You're attached to being the one who loves deeply, who stays, who understands, who doesn't give up. That identity feels noble, but it can become a trap where you tolerate what you wouldn't tolerate if you weren't trying to be that person. Hook 4 is fantasy future. The version of them that finally shows up consistently. That future feels real to your nervous system. Letting go feels like grief. Hook 5 is relief addiction. When they return after silence, your nervous system experiences a drop in alarm. That drop feels euphoric. You interpret relief as proof. Proof that it matters. Proof that they care. Proof that it's working. But relief is not repair. Relief is just your nervous system leaving survival mode temporarily. If there is no structural change, relief becomes another hook that keeps you waiting. Now, here is the most important distinction in this entire video. Waiting for someone to change is not the same as allowing time for growth. Allowing time for growth is conditional. It has standards. It has boundaries. It has a timeline. It has evidence of movement. Waiting for someone to change is unconditional. It has endless extensions. It has moving goalposts. It has you shrinking your needs to keep the bond alive. If you want to know which one you're doing, ask this. Do I have a clear definition of what change looks like? And am I seeing consistent movement toward it? If not, you're not in patience. You're in postponement. And postponement is where you lose yourself quietly. Now, the next part is where people finally stop waiting because it gives them a structure that their nervous system can actually hold. The exit is not a speech. The exit is a contract change. You stop running the relationship on hope-based access, and you start running it on evidence-based access. Evidence-based access means your investment matches their behavior, not your fantasy. It means you stop giving full emotional access to partial behavior. It means you stop escalating intimacy when consistency is missing. You can be warm, but you're not easy. Kind without being easy. That phrase matters because it's the entire skill set. kind means you don't demonize them, you don't punish, you don't attack. Easy means you don't give full access just because they feel like returning for comfort. Now, practically, evidence-based access requires 3 things. 1. Your minimums. Not preferences, minimums. Minimums are basic consistency, basic consideration, willingness to repair, willingness to define, mutual effort. 2. Your boundary policy. A boundary is what you do when the minimum isn't met. Not what you say in a long message, what you do. And 3. Pacing. You pace closeness based on demonstrated capacity, not on chemistry at the peak. You stop acting at the peak. Because in avoidant dynamics, the peak is where fear spikes. If you ask for definition or reassurance at the peak, it often reads as pressure. So, your anxious system needs a different rule. When activated, delay action. Regulate first, then decide. That rule alone breaks the loop because it removes the reward of urgency. Now, here's what will happen if you stop waiting. You will feel withdrawal symptoms. Waiting is not only a relationship behavior, it is a chemical loop. If you stop chasing, your nervous system will spike at first. It will say, do something, fix it, send the message, clarify, save it. You have to treat that urge as a signal, not a command. The urge is your body trying to restore the old reward schedule. Anxiety, then contact, then relief. When you remove contact, you remove relief, and your body panics. That panic is not a sign you made the wrong decision. It's a sign you are detoxing from a pattern that trained you. So, the goal is not to feel calm instantly. The goal is to stop making decisions from panic. Over time, the nervous system recalibrates. It learns you can survive the uncertainty without chasing. And that's how anxious attachment becomes secure. Not by getting the avoidant to act differently, but by building a stable self who no longer depends on unstable rhythms. Now, let's talk about the avoidant side for a moment, because it explains why waiting can last forever if you don't change the contract. Avoidant people can genuinely miss you and still avoid accountability. Missing is a feeling. Repair is a behavior. Avoidants often return when they miss the comfort of connection, when they feel lonely, when they feel safe, when you pull away, when the pressure drops. But returning is not progress. Progress looks like increased consistency, increased willingness to talk, increased willingness to repair, increased willingness to define, increased follow-through. So, if you're waiting for someone to change, you need to stop confusing returns with growth. A return without repair is a reset. A reset feels like hope, but it keeps you trapped. Now, here is the cleanest way to know if someone is changing. They change without needing you to chase them into it. They take initiative. They hold themselves accountable. They adjust when they see they're hurting you. Not once, repeatedly. They don't ask you to keep paying the cost of their growth with your stability. That's growth. If you are the one carrying the entire transition, you are not in a growth process. You are in a waiting room. Now, I want to address the fear underneath all of this, because it's the fear that keeps people waiting even when they know they're bleeding. The fear is, if I stop waiting, I will lose them. And that fear is real. But here's the clean truth. If you lose someone because you required consistency and repair, you did not lose a stable bond. You lost a dynamic that required you to stay activated to keep it alive. And yes, there will be grief. You will grieve the person, but you will also grieve the future you imagined and the version of you that was going to be chosen in that story. That is why leaving waiting feels like death sometimes. Not because you're dramatic, but because you're letting a fantasy future die. Holding on to a pocket of hope keeps you attached because grief feels too final. But that pocket of hope is what keeps you in the waiting room. So the exit is the willingness to let the fantasy end and then build your life anyway. Not in a rushed way, in a grounded way. Now, here is a question that will tell you whether you're ready to stop waiting. Are you willing to be temporarily uncomfortable to stop being permanently unstable? That's the trade. You can choose temporary discomfort now or ongoing instability later. Waiting is ongoing instability disguised as love. Structure is temporary discomfort that buys you your baseline back. Now, I'll give you a final compass line that makes decisions simple. Don't ask whether they can change. Ask whether the current contract is acceptable. Because you don't date potential, you date the contract. The contract is the pattern. If the contract requires you to shrink, overfunction, suppress your needs, and stay in suspense, it's not love, it's endurance. And endurance is not a romantic destiny. Endurance is what happens when you keep hoping a pattern will change while you keep rewarding it. So stop rewarding it. Align access with behavior. Require repair. Require consistency. Pace your investment. And then the relationship either evolves or it ends. Both outcomes protect you. Because the goal is not to guarantee their change. The goal is to stop postponing your own life. Welcome to PsychBond. You're safe here.